Hello, and welcome to today's event, Revolutionizing Agriculture Through Emerging Technologies. I'm Stephanie Wander, the Director of Programs here at the Geotech Center. We'd like to thank John Deere for their support and partnership on this event and welcome them to join the panels. I'd also like to welcome Daniela Tavo and David Bray. David Bray is a Distinguished Fellow with the Atlantic Council Geotech Center, and Daniela Tavo is a Senior Fellow with the Geotech Center. Both will be moderating and hosting today's conversation. Danielle, let me turn it over to you to introduce our really esteemed group of panelists, and we're just absolutely thrilled to have this conversation today.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. I'm so excited to be here. If anyone's wondering, I am in Washington, D.C. right now. I know we have people joining us from around the world. I am a Senior Fellow with Atlantic Council, and with David Bray, I'm the co-creator of Agritech Action. So we are very honored to be here today with this very distinguished panel of experts and our distinguished speaker. And before I introduce everyone, I want to say a few words about the events of the past few weeks that have been on everyone's hearts and minds. Of course, I'm speaking about the devastating events that have been happening in the Ukraine. Amid the chaos and devastation, we've seen an unprecedented outpouring of support from around the world for the people of Ukraine. And seeing the personal stories that have been shared across our screens through news and social media, we've also witnessed the importance of resilience when faced with devastation. Today's discussion is about building resilience in our systems, and not only to protect our precious resources today, but to ensure their sustainability for the future as we tackle the next generation of issues. Many of you have heard us at the Geotech Center speak about food security, what it means and why it's so important. And as David would say, and he said many times, that we are, after all, 4 meals away from anarchy. You've also heard us say that technology, as a predicate for good, will help us achieve our goals in building a safer, better, and more inclusive society. With that, it's my great pleasure to introduce our first speaker, and I'll get to our panelists after Kim. Kim Noe is an agricultural engineer and a rising star at one of our very favorite tech companies, John Deere. She's the manager of corporate sustainability reporting for Deere and Company. She's responsible for execution and sustainability strategy, climate change, and leading Deere's sustainability reporting. I'm looking forward to some good news, Kim, by the way. So with that, I'm going to hand you the floor.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. It's been a pleasure to be with you in the audience in our panel today. John Deere has been on a sustainability journey for over 15 years. Rooted in efficiency within our operations, we've expanded our sustainability focus to enable our customers to be more profitable and sustainable. In 2019, we released our first sustainability report where we covered all 3 pillars of sustainability: environmental, social, and governance. In 2020, we focused on demonstrating tangible outcomes for our customers across the globe with our technologies. With our most recent sustainability report, we continue to expand the connections between sustainability, tech, and agriculture by tying the power of our strategy to the future impact of sustainability and connecting directly to our next set of goals, the LEAP ambitions. Those LEAP ambitions, which you'll hear about shortly, highlights that sustainability is key for our customers' success within their production systems. For example, in the cotton production system, the intersection of sustainability, agriculture, and technology shines where hard iron improvements matched with state-of-the-art technology solutions produce both environmental and financial benefits for our customers. Our See and Spray technology reduces the number of passes and quantity of herbicide applied. See and Spray is a computer on wheels, where multiple cameras process images and respond with application at 12 miles an hour, covering 120 feet at a time. So imagine, compare that to you riding your bike, identifying a weed, spraying it, all while continuing to move forward. And that's just in your line of sight. Pair See and Spray with our ExactApply sprayer system, section control, and auto track guidance within the cotton production system customers not only see a sustainability gain to reduce herbicide usage and insecticide, but also reduce fertilizer use, seed savings, and reduce fuel consumption. But a cost savings as well, ensuring their continued financial stability. People outside of agriculture don't always know or understand how cutting-edge technologies like Cotton Production System example are a key part of how John Deere serves our customers across the globe, much less how those technologies enable us to have and support sustainable farming. The John Deere Smart Industrial Strategy focuses on delivering intelligent, connected machines and applications that will revolutionize production systems within agriculture and construction, unlocking customer economic value across the life cycle in ways that are more sustainable for all, just like we saw in that cotton production system example. The next step in our journey, our LEAP ambitions, are the measure of our strategy. Our ambitions align with our customers' production systems to optimize their complete operations, ensuring that every drop, every hour, every seed, every pound, and every single pass counts, delivering better outcomes with fewer resources. We see an incredible amount of opportunity to impact our customers' production systems and have identified key executional drivers that lead John Deere to achieve our financial and sustainable outcomes. Those key customer outcomes include a 20% improvement in nitrogen use efficiency, 20% improvement of crop production efficiency, culminating into a 15% reduction of greenhouse gas emissions for our ag customers, all of which are enabled by technology. Our LEAP ambitions are focused goals designed to boost economic value and sustainability for our customers. These LEAP ambitions link directly to the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal number 2, around ending hunger, achieving food security and improving nutrition, and promoting sustainable ag. John Deere is uniquely positioned to deliver both economic and sustainable value for our customers through advanced solutions and technologies. We at Deere are grateful for this opportunity to work with the Atlantic Council's Geotech Center to raise visibility on sustainability in agriculture through technology, such an important topic. The intersection of sustainability, technology, and agriculture certainly requires a large ecosystem of stakeholders and innovative ideas to advance and implement within John Deere, as well as agriculture. So I look forward to hearing the perspectives of our esteemed panelists, and thank you again for the opportunity to showcase what John Deere is doing in this arena. Back to you.
Hello. Okay, I'm back on screen. So, Kim, thank you so much. And if anything, I would say in these past couple of weeks, where we're having discussions about how can we best use our resources, and it's through precision technology. And when I think about precision technology and the ability to deliver across the globe, I think about John Deere. So we are also very glad to have you here. And with that, I would also like to introduce our esteemed panelists, starting with my co-host, Dr. David Bray, who's my personal superhero and co-creator of Agritech Action. Welcome, David, of course. And I'd like to also introduce from John Deere, Alexey Rostopchov, who is the head of John Deere Labs and Sustainability, as you can see from his background. That's real, but I think I may want to borrow it for my virtual. I would also like to introduce and welcome warmly Aisha House. Thank you so much for being here, Vice President, Congressional and Public Affairs for the Millennium Challenge Corporation. Aisha, thank you so much for being here. Gandhar Desai, who is the analyst for Sustainable and Digital Agriculture Global Center for Technology, Innovation, Sustainable Development, United Nations Development Program. Aparna Srivastav, thank you so much for being here. Deputy Chief Climate Officer, International Development Finance Corporation. And then, of course, Jack Okamura, thank you so much for being here, National Program Leader for Crop Protection and, Crop Production and Protection from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And I think we have a quorum of amazing experts. Thank you so much. And thank you for all of the great work that you're doing to promote food security and climate security and national security. So I would like to start off with a very important 50,000-foot level question, which is, what is our North Star here? What is it that we're trying to achieve? What is the world that we see coming down the road that we're trying to prepare for? So I'm going to ask each one of you to kind of give me, in a few minutes, what you see coming over the horizon in the next 10, 25, and 50 years, and how are these events influencing your company and organization and thinking about agritech. And Aparna, can we start with you?
Thank you. Yes, no, I'd love to kick this off, and just thank you again for bringing together this group. This is a really, really important topic that we're diving into today. In terms of answering this, I'd love to kind of reframe it a little bit to help talk about kind of how we're thinking about it as, you know, the DFC and also kind of the U.S. government in terms of climate more broadly. I don't think we can be talking about the agriculture or food security space without also addressing kind of climate more broadly. And so as DFC, I think, you know, over the next, time horizon that you've listed out, whether it's 10, 25, or 50 years, we've really recognized the impacts of climate that we're seeing right now and are projected. And so in response to this last year, basically, as if folks are not aware, DFC is the U.S. government's development finance institution. We are the U.S. government's development bank. And so as in response to kind of the various prioritization statements that have been made from the administration on climate, DFC has also risen to this occasion and made several key commitments in the climate space. One is, committing to have a net zero portfolio by 2040, one of the earliest such commitments of any G7 DFI. Along with this, we've also committed to have 1/3 of all new transactions to be climate linked from fiscal year 2023 onward. And this really has provided a foundation for how we're thinking about ensuring that we're investing in the sectors that are really critical in addressing development challenges that are being threatened by climate. And of course, food security and agriculture is a huge part of that. Along with this, I just want to also flag that we've also specifically announced that we're seeking to invest $1 billion in food security and ag projects over the next 5 years. This is in partnership with USAID under Feed the Future, and is really something that we're quite proud of and are eager to be kind of building up this pipeline of investments. I can pause there, but I think just really want to underscore that I think we're really eager to expand the definition of climate investing, because previously a lot of climate investing has been considered synonymous to renewable energy. And so we're really committed to broadening that definition to include sectors as critical as agriculture.
That is great to hear, because we also believe, as you do, that you cannot have this discussion about climate change without looking at food security and national security and economic security as well. So thank you so much. I'd like to turn to Gandhar.
Hi, thank you, Daniela. I'm really delighted to be here along with my co-panelists and representing UNDP. So UNDP, the United Nations Development Program, is the UN's global policy network supporting countries across the world in developing solutions to address the most pressing challenges in line with the Sustainable Development Goals. And so when we look at agriculture, right, looking some of the key challenges and some of the trends, I mean, in the 20th century, there have been multiple transformations in the field of agriculture, starting from farm mechanization in the early part of the century, which really drastically reduced the amount of labor required in farms, to the Green Revolution in the mid-century, which dramatically boosted yields and tremendously contributed to food security across the world. And we are in the midst of another revolution in global agriculture, which I call the digital revolution, and it's just getting started. I would like to note here that when we talk about agriculture, about 83% of the farmers in the world, they own less than 2 hectares of land. They're smallholder farmers. Almost 70% own less than 1 hectare. And a vast majority of them live in the low and middle income countries. And that's where most of our work lies as UNDP. So looking over the horizon in the short term, I would see, an increasing access to relatively simple digital solutions. And in that regard, mobile phones are particularly a game changer. Because we are seeing increasing access to smartphones and internet connectivity across the world, even in the most impoverished regions of the world. They, in a sense, have truly democratized digital agriculture, providing farmers with various services, farm advisories, weather alerts, access to markets and financial services. So we can expect this trend to continue over the next 5 to 10 years with an increasing pace. But when we look at the long term, right, and this is where we see a big disruption coming, and that's in the form of really high-tech indoor vertical farming or controlled environment agriculture. So there's already a big push going on for localizing food production, especially we have seen in the context of COVID and the supply chain disruptions it has caused. There's a growing trend on urban farming and producing food locally. And with a controlled environment, you can really counter a lot of challenges faced by traditional agriculture, greater protection against diseases, climate disasters, and using emerging technologies, whether it's sensors and IoT and artificial intelligence. You can really achieve yields of over 100 times in some cases. So when we look at the long term, we need to be thinking about what happens to the existing models of agricultural production. What happens to the farmers? Vast majority of them actually rely on agriculture as the primary source of livelihood. And given that we can produce all this food in a very limited, small amount of land compared to traditional methods, what do we do with the land? And all these questions and the answers we find for them, these have massive implications for global development that we need to start thinking about.
Thank you so much. There are so many things there that I feel like we could talk an entire day about some of the issues that you've raised that are all very critical. I do have to say, when you said digital revolution in agriculture, I got chills. It's great to hear. And I think it's really important what you mentioned, that there is not a one size fits all when it comes to technology. As you say, so many of the farmers are operating on very small plots of land. And what technology looks like to them is very different. So I'd like to ask the same question to Alexei.
Great, thanks, and great points from the first two speakers. So I'll really aim to build on that. As we think ahead to 10, 25, 50 years, I think the trends are generally going to be very similar in just various, I would say, levels of implementation and reflection in the industry. A few that I would add, one is really around the impacts of labor and shifting demographics on the producer front. This is something that we've seen exacerbated by COVID and obviously recent geopolitical events. But it's really been a trend that's been ongoing. And so one of the things that we need to think about, and as happened in the 20th century, is the volume or amount of food produced and fuel produced per farmer has really been dramatically increasing. And that's something that we will need to continue both for the growing population as well as the food security and resilience issues that we've been talking about. The second thing I would refer to is really changing and evolving consumer preferences. And that's something that we're starting to see really across the value chain, and something that I anticipate is going to continue snowballing in both food production and fiber. So your cotton and other fiber production and your fuel production, as we think about the energy mix, and as we think about how crops are used in the U.S. in particular to create a good, a significant amount of renewable fuel sources. And so that's something that I think is going to continue changing and evolving, both in terms of policy, but also voluntary initiatives that we're seeing from companies up and down the value chain, from John Deere on down. But there's a few things that I think won't change. One of which is really the economic drivers from the producer front. At the end of the day, whatever happens has to be economically sustainable and viable for the producers. If it isn't, it's just not going to happen. And we've seen the pain that has over generations, really, when that happens, has had on the producers. So that's something that's really paramount in terms of how we think about sustainability for our producers. It's, as Kim mentioned, really doing more with less. And that's something that is a trend that I think will only get more and more important over time. And as we just talked about, not to repeat, but the importance of technology in that is really going to be paramount as well, really enabled by connectivity. One of the things that we've been doing is continuing to democratize that access to technology. As with most technologies, you start on the premium end, and then as the technology matures, you're able to provide access to more and more customers. And so that's, one example of that for us has really been connectivity. Is initially it was a paid feature that was in the higher end premium equipment, and as time has gone on, we've actually just included it as a free component in our equipment. So I think that's going to be a key enabler over the coming decades.
Thank you so much, Alexei. Again, such a great panel, because your knowledge extends so far beyond agriculture, as it should and needs to. Agriculture is incredibly complex, and people who eat food every day don't realize how complicated it is to deliver that food to you in a way that is sustainable, nutritious, and affordable. You mentioned, about the energy mix. You mentioned about labor. As we're striving to create more prosperity among people around the globe, it means also fewer people that might want to work on the farm. That's another issue. So for those of you just joining us, thank you very much. The question that I'm posing to our panelists right now is, what is the North Star? How do you see the next 10, 25, 50 years? And how is that guiding you making your decisions today? So thank you for joining us. I also want to note that there are a lot of questions that are coming through in the Q&A. We will get to them. So thank you very much. So Aisha, I would like to pose that very question to you. How do you see the events of the next 10, 25, 50 years unfolding? And what does that mean for your decisions today?
Right. No, so thank you all. Thank you again for having MCC. For those who don't know us, MCC is the Millennium Challenge Corporation. We're one of the newer agencies across the government. We've been around for 18 years, but in those 18 years, we have invested over $14 billion in 40 countries. And in that investment, of the 14 billion, 2 billion, nearly 2 billion has been in agriculture. And more than that has been in even specifically climate smart activities. So like our friends at the DFC, over the next few years, we've committed to doing 50% of our portfolio in climate smart investments. And that's nearly $5 billion when you think about how large our compacts are over the next 5 years. So we're really excited to be here and to be talking about this topic. To your question, which is a really exciting one, I think the most important trend that we see around climate change is the issues around water availability and resource management, post-harvest loss specifically. And that's something that we're investing in with regard to some special things we're doing with regard to integrated cold chain storage activities. We also are really looking at, with regard to climate, issues of reduced yields. I mean, we all know we have to start producing more food, and we are in a crisis. And so in order to really deliver, we're looking at technology in a way on the front end using GIS and other integrated services so that we can identify where we put our investments, but also looking at ways to be smart about post-harvest. How can we make sure that food produced is food saved? A few other things that I'd like to mention is just this aggravated political, economic, and kind of market volatility that we're all working through. I mean, it's a very obvious statement, but it's really been challenging, particularly for global partners that we work with, because our work is in partnership with governments. Challenges like things that are happening in Burkina Faso or Tunisia, these have become issues as far as just democracy and governance that have bled into the issue around climate change and where and how we're using our investments. I'd also just like to just circle back and close by saying, you know, for us, technology is about not just policy transformation, but really community ownership. And so when you're talking about the use of technology, it's important that the technology fit the actual financial or management or sustainability constraint versus us just picking a technology and making it fit or work for wherever we are. So we're looking very thoughtfully around what's sustainable, what can be community owned, and frankly, what's the tool that when we leave, our partners will look to see the private sector potentially crowd in after we've left. So from GIS to other investments, we're excited about talking about it, and we've got a lot of things happening at MCC with regard to that.
And thank you so much, Aisha. You guys do incredible work, and you do very targeted, thoughtful, full court press work in compacts, you know, around the world. You mentioned North Africa. I mean, I think it's so appropriate right now. If you look at world trade data, and of course my background is in trade, and understanding, you know, how much Ukraine right now contributes to agricultural security and what that's going to mean, particularly to countries in North Africa and Turkey, some in Asia, Egypt, that are very reliant on these imports. And it's very important, you know, their food security problems are our food security problems, are our security problems. So thank you very much for that very thoughtful response. I would like to finally turn to Jack over at USDA. And of course, you can't talk about agriculture without including USDA. So same question for you. What are your North Stars right now? USDA is undergoing a lot of changes right now. Next 5, 10, 25 years, 50 years, what do you see happening, and how's that guiding your decisions today?
Oh, thank you, Daniela. Thank you, Atlanta Council and John Deere for this opportunity. So I'm here representing the Department of Agriculture's Agricultural Research Service. So we are the in-house research division of USDA, and we represent about 2,000 scientists, 660 projects, focusing on everything from the beginning of agriculture, the seeds, all the way to the end, and production and post-harvest, and supplying industry with the materials for making agriculturally based products and so on. So it's great to be here. But I'd like to switch gears now and talk about seeds. So we haven't heard too much about seeds so far in our discussion, but plant breeding and in particular biotechnology are an important component of this discussion. But why now and why today? So just as background, the USDA Agricultural Research Service supports both crop and animal breeding across much of U.S. agriculture. And just as an example, over the last 5 years, USDA ARS released 621 new varieties and or germplasm lines for production, for use by public and industry breeders, basically to strengthen our agricultural production system and to provide, as you said, Daniela, safe, nutritious foods. Many of those germplasm releases include perennial and specialty crops that have long generation times, including, for example, tree fruits, tree nuts, and other crops that therefore took decades to develop. So thus, planning and research are critical when we talk about the next generations of seeds. At the same time, as has already been mentioned, agriculture is experiencing a growing crisis from climate change, extreme weather events, increased competition for natural resources, increasing production costs. So therefore, the challenge that breeders face today has been and continues to be immense and is growing in importance. So over the next 10, 25, 50 years, we need new crops that are more climate resilient, can tolerate increasingly extreme weather events, are disease and pest resistant, crops that are dramatically more efficient at using nitrogen, phosphorus fertilizer, and reducing greenhouse gas production. So these challenges and more will drive increasing demand for innovation in crop breeding today. So again, given the agricultural crisis and growing drivers for change, how do we accelerate the pace of germplasm improvement for agriculture? How do we together ensure that no crop is left behind? So what is USDA doing to help meet these challenges and demands? Breeders today have many technology choices that have been developed over the years for germplasm improvement. So we all understand classical genetics, the use or the incorporation of genes, new genes from crop wild relatives, mutational breeding, marker-assisted selection, genomic selection, using conventional biotechnology, and the latest tool in the toolbox is genome editing. So just wanted to emphasize that USDA ARS embraces all technological advances, including genome editing for research and for germplasm improvement. And our breeders are using genome editing to develop many new key traits with university and industry partners for the benefit of producers and consumers as our resources allow. So in closing, this is a valuable conversation for research leadership and understanding how we go forward together. And we should continue to include and emphasize the genetic improvement of seeds. So back to you, Danielle.
Jack, I can't express my appreciation enough for you mentioning that, and I could not agree with you more. For so many reasons. First of all, we need every single tool in our tool chest available and ready to go to address food crisis. And going back to something that Gundar mentioned before, the number of people, farmers, 40% of the world is employed by agriculture, and the number of farmers that not only are reliant on their crops, these small farms, to sell, but also to feed their family. And there's nothing more devastating than being hit by a disease and devastating your entire crop, not just for that planting season, but for seasons to come. What do you do? And these are the harsh realities, I would say, that are facing many people around the world that, thanks to technology that we can start to address as long as there's a better understanding and acceptance of those technologies. And our job, I think, is to more effectively communicate that. And one of the things we're trying to do, just to close on that thought, for those of us who believe that climate change is real, and I think everyone here, and will be very devastating, policy cannot keep up at the pace of technology to address that particular concern. So thank you very much. And I would like to now turn over to Dr. David Bray.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you, panelists. Danielle, you set it up perfectly for the next round of considerations we want to pose to the panelists. I do want to remind our audience that this is a special session that's going 90 minutes. So we will not be ending at 30 minutes into the hour. We'll actually be ending at 11 o'clock Eastern. So we have another about 55 minutes to go. So stay tuned, and we will try to capture all the questions that have been raised in the chat as best we can. We may not be able to get to them all, but we'll try to do our best. And I'll try to weave them into this next question. And the question now that we want to have the panelists consider, in some respects, was teed off by how Daniela positioned the conversation about disruption, climate change, but also human caused disruptions is why must farming economies pivot to embrace both sustainability and new technologies. And sort of this is really sort of asking our panelists to sort of make that explicit for policymakers, for the public, for world leaders, as to why there's a link between using new technologies and achieving sustainability. And Aisha, I'm going to go to you first, and I'm going to highlight real quick something that you said in the earlier conversation that I thought was so great, which was that it was important that technology fit the context and constraints that are happening at the local level, something that is sustainable and community owned. And if I can ask, as you think about the why must farming economies pivot, there's a question we have in the chat from Joe Butte, who asked, how can resilient solutions to farm help the world recover from disruptions that might be human caused or naturally caused? And so if you could work that into your answer, I'd be very interested in your thoughts.
No, yeah, definitely. Thank you. Thank you for highlighting that. And thank you for the additional question from the audience, because it's something that we're thinking about every day. I mean, we know the status quo will just not work in the future. And so although it's important to do the investments that we have in the past, we also appreciate that without a systems change and being conscious of what's happening around the world, we'll continue to have reduced yields, we'll continue to have lower food nutrition content, and we'll continue to have this market volatility that, frankly, unless we do something to change it, farmers will continue to produce and not make the amount of money necessary to continue to sustain themselves, their families, and their communities. So we're definitely considering that, as well as the fact that climate stress, our growing population, and frankly, the demand for staples not rising in the way that a lot of us had anticipated in the past. We are trying to be very conscious of the fact that, whatever approach we take has to take into consideration the, sustainability on the ground, the security on the ground, and frankly, also to, preserving and or conserving the natural resources that we can. So I'll just give you a couple examples. I mean, for us, we're leveraging GIS mapping and using the overlay for our horticulture projects and enterprises. MCC builds roads. We do compacts in the amounts of, $500 million to $1 billion. So it makes sense for us to be strategic in using technology to really think through, where do we strategically place those rows? Where do we strategically place, irrigation systems? We also are looking at, for purposes of trade and market sustainability, what do we do when it comes to actually thinking through, I'll give you a great example. We are working in Niger. We know that there is incredible insecurity in the north. So we have a project where we're working with pastoralists to actually identify, through GIS and other technologies, where we should plot drinking points along the way in order for, when pastoralists are moving their cattle, how can we strategically make sure that they are safe, but also placing things in a systematic way where water sources can be maintained, cattle can have access to public land pastures, we can enhance animal services and general health services, and do vaccination campaigns. Although I know that we're talking about very big picture ideas, for us sometimes, the big picture is the fact that we are living in a more volatile world that is more food insecure. And so in order to be able to bring it down to where we're doing the work, a lot of times we really have to allow our partners to drive the decision making and help us to do our best. So I guess I would end, and I hope I've answered your question, but I would end by saying, powering certain types of technology, again, it has to be bespoke to the communities that we're working in. Although we may be doing investments where we're helping to purchase, climate-friendly buses, or looking at urbanization in Kenya and trying to identify market opportunities for smallholder farmers. At the end of the day, we're really trying to make sure that, again, food produced is food saved. And so as much as I know we are doing all of these different types of investments and using these examples to create best practices for the next investment, if we are not strategically using satellite and other technology, and if we're not investing in the cold chain for post-harvest, then we really are setting ourselves up for failure, because we want to make sure that, particularly for those two areas, when we invest in those two things, we ensure that there is a possibility for sustainable market growth. And so ultimately, I think for me, what I would answer to your question is, when we're looking at sustainability and the use of new technology, again, it has to be bespoke to the community. We should be strategic, and we're going to be putting out a few challenges with regard to new and innovative ways and technologies so that we can invest in those two spaces. And then finally, we really want to make sure that it's country owned and country driven. So when we see the technology, we want to be in lockstep with our partners to identify and finally make the final investment.
Well said, Aisha. And I really liked how you gave both a specific example of how GIS can consider both environmental and climate related considerations, but also public safety and internal safety considerations as well. And then you zoomed up to both thinking about satellite imagery and how that plays a role in cold storage. So that's a really compelling picture. And Alexi, this tees it up well for you to sort of your same thoughts about the linkage for policymakers and the public in terms of sustainability and new technologies. And if I can ask you to weave in two additional questions that we have gotten from the audience as well. One is from Benjamin, who wants to know, can agriculture help with CO2 capture? And then we also have a question from Eric, who's referencing that John Deere recently announced that cotton farmers can calculate sustainability metrics from field to market. How can other crops be included in that same approach?
Yeah, lots to cover, so you'll need to keep me honest on time here. But great conversation thus far, and I think I'll focus more on the how rather than the why, because I think we're pretty clear on the why technology will help us actually get to more sustainable outcomes. And the only thing I'll say on just the what, I think the way we really look at it is the two are just tied at the hip. Technology is what's going to let you be more and more sustainable from both an environmental and economic standpoint. As we think about, in my view, there's a policy driver and there's a technology driver, and I like how Daniela mentioned, I believe, that policy can't keep up. At the end of the day, it is a longer term impact, but it is an important one. So, for example, the USDA Climate Smart program is really interesting in that we need to be able to really use all the tools at our disposal, both technology and policy, to help move some of these things forward, really through supporting the producer and supporting the grower. And so that's one of the reasons I think the partnership program is really interesting there, in that it's really focused on the grower and how do we incentivize the growers and help them make the transition from a practice standpoint. On the technology side of things, we're also not waiting for policy, and we're also looking to make the best decisions in favor for the grower and give them the best technology to achieve that. So maybe a few points here, and I'll tackle some of the questions in there, David. One is, as we I really like how Aisha said it's about serving the community with the technology and making sure it's relevant to them. And so that's one lens through which we look at this, and we recognize that we have a very wide swath of customers and different crops and different geographies of different size land holdings. And so we're constantly innovating in how do we make sure the right technology is getting into the right hands. So one example of that is our partnership with Hello Tractor in Africa, which recognizes the fact that when you're buying a piece of equipment, certain economics have to make sense, and if you're able to spread that out and make that more of a variable cost across many smaller land owners, that makes it much more affordable and economic to adopt that technology. So as we think about technology and access to technology, that's something that's constantly at the top of our minds, is how do we make sure technology that makes sense for producers is able to get into their hands. And I'll use that as a bit of a pivot to talk about cotton and the Cotton Trust Protocol that was mentioned. I think that's another example of that. When we think about cotton, it is a very complicated production process. There's upwards of 11 different steps in terms of equipment running through the field to protect the crop, manage the crop. So there's a lot going on. And so as we think about the industry efforts to make it more sustainable, the Cotton Trust Protocol is an example of an industry-led initiative where you're able to actually monitor the practices that went into producing the crop. And the really exciting piece here for us is the industry is really starting to rally behind this as a step. We have equipment in the field that's highly automated, very advanced in terms of helping, again, producers do more with less in terms of both the way they plant, the way they harvest, the way they apply with See and Spray that helps reduce herbicide use by 2/3 or more. And so how do we help the grower tell that story to the rest of the value chain? And so the Cotton Trust Protocol is something that actually our growers came to us and said, hey, I'm looking to participate in this, or I'm being asked to participate in this. This equipment running through the field is already collecting all of the data. Why do I have to fill out 150 question survey and manually re-enter all of this data? And so we made the investment to make it push button easy for growers to be able to participate in the Cotton Trust Protocol with field to market. And now most of that data really just flows through the system. And we've seen really positive feedback to that. We actually ran a pilot with it last year and opened it up to all of our growers really the season, because we just had such overwhelming feedback and how it made it easy for them to do this. And so I think that word easy is really important, and that's how we see technology fitting into the equation. And I think that also applies to, I think the other question was around carbon emissions, and I think there's probably hours we can spend talking about carbon markets. But I think the same philosophy applies there, which is these are really hard things to navigate. There's a lot of ambiguity. I mean, you can barely keep up with all the different programs and requirements, and things are shifting under growers' feet. And by the way, this is a separate thing for them to even think about. Their primary purpose is to grow their current crop as efficiently and productively and economically as possible. So it's just yet another thing for them to worry about, to think about. So to the extent that we can leverage technology to make that easy, that's really the approach that we're taking, is leveraging the data, leveraging the technology, and making that technology accessible to producers to be able to implement and work with these various sustainability programs out there.
Excellent. Well, you managed to work in all three questions, Alexi. So congrats.
Excellent.
That was very well done. And you actually set up the stage well for Jack as I go to you. In addition to asking you the thoughts about how tech and sustainability are linked, there is a question from Bob that says, as we make that pivot, we need to think about how do we actually upgrade our data capabilities, logistics systems, in terms of also education. And so I'd be interested if you'd be willing to share thoughts about, this is not going to be an easy pivot, but if you have thoughts about how we can make that pivot as we embrace using technology to become more sustainable. Oh, and you're muted, sorry.
Okay, back online. First, I'm not an expert in production, so my hat's off to producers and industry partners who work with them, because it is not an easy job being a producer today in terms of the bureaucracy, in terms of the technologies, and being on top of all these cutting edge of technologies. And so, our growers, in addition to that, are, increasingly being challenged on multiple fronts. We talked about the environment and its challenges, including pests and diseases. Production costs are currently unstable and complicating the planning and the business. And of course, you add now society and political leadership and the pressure to reduce greenhouse gas production. So it's important that we continue to support growers and provide them with the tools and technologies, including seeds, that they need to adapt. And so I think focusing the power of new breeding technologies on sustainability traits for the purpose of climate change mitigation, just as one example, is an important approach to incorporate in our strategic planning going forward. So what are we doing at USDA ARS to help meet these challenges and demands? So just one, way upstream, high level example. So again, I'm not in production, we're upstream in the research side. I mentioned the USDA ARS's National Plant Germplasm System. It's a gene bank. It's among the very best in the world and is a rich repository for new genes that breeders frequently tap into for new target trait improvement. And so the MPGS, as we call it, contains 600,000 accessions, germplasm accessions, that represent 16,000 species, including corn, soybean, and other major commodities. So the point here is back in 2020, so how much genetic diversity and opportunity is represented in our germ banks, and how can we tap into it for enhancing sustainable agricultural production? So in 2020, ARS scientists, our university and industry collaborators, published in the journal Science an estimate of how much genetic opportunity is represented in our US maize germplasm collection. And that's based on the very high resolution, high fidelity sequencing of 40 maize inbred reference genomes that were picked to represent the majority of the diversity in our collection. So for one inbred, there are roughly about 40,000 genes in a single maize inbred. However, if we look across these 44 selected inbred corn lines and you total up all of the individual genes, we estimate there are about 120,000 genes represented in this collection of 44 strategically selected inbreds or parent lines. Therefore, there's about 70 to 80,000 genes that are dispensable in corn that may have been key to adaptation to unique environments, environmental scenarios, climate, and so on. Now, those have been tapped by breeders, but we have a new set of traits that we're trying to focus on now in terms of sustainability, increasing our nitrogen use efficiency, phosphorus efficiency, reducing greenhouse gases. So it's very much time to revisit this rich repository of genetic opportunity and focus on these key traits for going forward. So it will take time. It will take an expert team of geneticists, breeders, physiologists, bioinformaticists, and resources to help support this research. But I think it's very important, and I think it's relevant for this conversation. And one of the questions I remember, I don't remember all the questions, David, was about carbon sequestration.
Right.
Yep. And definitely, you have to tell the breeders what the traits are, and they know this. But if there are incentives to develop these traits and incorporate them into our crops, and if the genetics are there, then it can be done. So it's all part of this strategic planning and dialogue, providing the resources, and then, finding the best scientists to carry out that research. So back to you, David.
Well, I appreciate it, Jack. And as someone with a background in bioinformatics, you made my heart glow when you referenced the need for that to play a role in this space. So thank you. That is definitely an important dimension of the conversations here. So I'm going to go now to Aparna and then Gandhar. And I recognize, you have the challenge of following these great insights that we've already heard from folks. So I will also share, if you want to tackle, and you don't have to if you don't want to, we have 2 questions from the chat that link to the question about sustainability in tech as you think about your answers. One is a question that says, how might new methods of organic or regenerative farming interact with use of new technologies? And a related question is, do we see significant growth in vertical or indoor farming? And so, Aparna, if I could ask you, again, your thoughts on how and why must farming economies pivot to embrace both sustainability and new technologies? Over to you.
Thank you. No, and this is, as you mentioned, it's a hard act to follow given the other responses that we've heard with regards to this. But I think I'll actually maybe zoom out in how I address this, because I think as we think about kind of sustainability and new technologies, how we're thinking about it at DFC, I think I'll just try to add a little bit of color to that in terms of what we're looking to provide, because ultimately I think with regards to the questions about vertical farming and all those pieces, I might not be the best to speak to that, so I'll let that be answered by other folks here. But as with regards to the pledge that we've made in terms of investments in agriculture and food security, we are committed to both sustainability and new technologies, whether it's through direct financing or technical assistance or insurance to private sector projects. We're really committed to advancing agricultural production, irrigation, food processing, food storage, shipping and logistics, and fintech related to global food systems. Because ultimately, we recognize agriculture as a crucial sector in developing economies and how it plays a really fundamental role in promoting healthy populations. As we know, as it's been discussed, it's a main source of employment for communities, and yet many still struggle to earn enough to support their families. Along with this, weak global agricultural supply chains result in significant waste before the food produce can actually even reach consumers. And so the food security investments that we make are really aiming to help mitigate these complex challenges while also introducing technology and innovation to strengthen long-term resiliency through a variety of sectors, whether it's food processing, storage, and delivery systems. And I think it's really important to also recognize that there's, we can't have these conversations in a vacuum. There are multiple overlapping global concerns from, what Daniela was talking about at the start of this conversation, but also we can't ignore, the impacts of COVID-19 and other health-related issues, water and sanitation, and other needs that affect healthy food production that really require for us to consider everything on the table, whether it's new technologies or practices like organic farming. So I'll pause there and just kind of really underscore that we're with the commitments that we've made, we really are looking to underscore and really hone in on the development impacts of these interventions and the support that we're providing.
Wow. And I think that was a great 50,000-foot view that you shared up about the fact that the world is still recovering from COVID-19. We have now added disruptions that have just recently occurred too. This is going to have ripple effects that are probably going to be felt for the decade ahead. And want to thank you and your organization for everything you're doing, because if we don't get ahead of it, these ripple effects will be more significant than if we take the time to focus on them now. And so Gandhar, you get to bring it home for us on this conversation about the linkage between technology and sustainability. So I'll go to you for your thoughts as to why this is important and how we should be thinking about this as we approach it from either the private sector or the public.
Thanks, David. So when we talk about not just agriculture, but looking at agriculture and food systems as a whole, they really need transformation. And let me just put across some figures to really emphasize the need for sustainability. What do we mean really by bringing sustainability into the sector? So according to WWF, 70% of our planet's biodiversity has been lost since 1970. 70%. And the single biggest contributor to biodiversity loss resulting from deforestation primarily, it's agriculture. And it seems like 70% is really a strong number to be making the case for this, because 70% of the world's fresh water is used just for agriculture. And astonishingly, almost half of that gets wasted due to various inefficiencies. And earlier speakers spoke about post-harvest losses and food losses. Almost a third of the food produced across in the whole world gets lost or wasted. Almost a third. And I mean, this is an astonishing loss of not just the food, but all the resources which went into producing it, whether it's water, energy, or the very hard labor by farmers. Additionally, almost half of the topsoil on the planet has been lost in the last 150 years. So when we look at technology and agriculture, it's we can use emerging technologies to improve yields, productivity, and thereby profits. But it can also be an enabler to address these very diverse sustainability challenges. And I can give you a few examples. For example, there is an increasing availability of very high resolution satellite imagery at great frequency as well. Using artificial intelligence, and UNDP is doing it in Amazon. So you can track deforestation activities taking place by analyzing this high resolution data and thereby take corrective measures. We are doing it in Amazon for forest risk commodities like soy and beef. Another really promising technology we see is blockchain. So agriculture supply chains are very complex, filled with a lot of different actors. So when we go from farmers to aggregators to primary producers, more production, then to the various logistics companies, then finally to distributors, retailers, and finally a food product goes to your market where you're able to buy. And in all this process, there are severe gaps in the data, particularly relating to sustainability. And a lot of these challenges occur at the farm level in the first mile of the production process. What blockchain can really do is bring together critical pieces of information, particularly related to sustainability, on a single platform where all the actors involved have visibility, and they can be assured if certain sustainable production practices were followed. The key barrier to implementing this, and this technology has been there for a while, it's really how do we get all these different stakeholders on the same table, agree to a same set of principles and values, and get them to share data, acknowledging that we are all tackling the same sustainability challenges. So we have, as UNDP, we have demonstrated the feasibility of using blockchain in various agri-commodities, including cocoa in Ecuador, cashmere wool in Mongolia. And now we also have some ongoing pilots for the spices value chain in India, for example. So this is how technology need not be only to improve yields. I mean, it can really be a game changer in addressing these very complex issues faced by the sector. And coming on to the question on vertical and indoor farming, maybe I can give it a shot. So this space has been seeing a lot of interest, particularly post-COVID, from investors, private investors, and it has been a long time in the making. There are very good use cases or scenarios where it can really add value. For example, where land is very scarce, right? So it might not make sense where there is a lot of land availability, a lot of resources. But think about small islands, for example. So the small island developing states spread across the world, whether it's the Caribbean, in the Pacific, or in the Indian and Atlantic Oceans, they have very limited land, and they depend a lot on food imports. Even Singapore, where I'm currently, it's a technically a developing country, but Singapore imports over 90% of its food, and the figure is as high as 70 to 80% in the Pacific states. Since it's a small island developing states. So it's in contexts like these where vertical and indoor farming can really help improve food security and really improve the nutritional outcomes of the population. Since a lot of food has to be imported, it's mostly processed and thereby contributing to a lot of issues, including the triple burden of malnutrition. So as a result, we have really high levels of obesity as well as non-communicable diseases in many of these island nations. So it has a great potential, as we see in island countries, as well as urban farming as a whole. It's a growing trend. The main barrier we see there is, it depends on how much of a technological sophistication you want to bring into the production process. So when we talk about controlled environment agriculture, it consumes a lot of energy, electricity, and that can be a challenge, particularly in the small island states. If we are able to somehow link urban food production, high-tech food production with the green transition and a shift to renewables, I think it can bear amazing results that way.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Gandhar. You did an amazing job of answering both why organic and regenerative farming can interact with what we're striving to do here with sustainability and tech, and also Benjamin's question about vertical farming. So thank you for incorporating that into your answer. And so Daniela, over to you. I feel like we still have about 24 minutes left here, but this could easily become a 3-day conversation, which obviously none of our panelists were prepared for. But over to you, Daniela, as we bring home the conversation as to why technology, sustainability, and it sounds also like data is so critical for the future ahead.
Well, I hope panelists brought their sleeping bags, because we can turn this into 3 days if you want. And you read my mind, actually. There's so much here. And I have to acknowledge that the questions that are coming in the Q&A are phenomenal. We're trying to address them, but every single one of them are great. And it just demonstrates how intelligent and knowledgeable our audience is. So we cannot talk about technology and how great it is and the opportunities there without talking about threats associated with those technologies. Gandhar, you're talking about indoor agriculture. There's some questions, not just about indoor agriculture, Ben, Larry, and Chaim on soil degradation as well, and aquaponics, and, there are opportunities, threats. So bearing that in mind in responding to this next question, and also, Jack talking about genetic editing, which, I think I will at least say this, European policy, for example, I get the sense, or everything we're reading, that they don't feel that they got it right on GMOs, and they want to change that for genetic editing. And genetic editing technology is critical for addressing climate change, as is a diversity of farming. Not just saying should we have big smalls or small farms. We need both. We need every tool. So bearing that in mind, I would like to ask our panelists one final question, which is, what is the biggest impediment to employing these new technologies that you've seen in agriculture, and what have we learned from the past? And Gandhar, I would like to start with you and then go to Aisha.
Sure, thanks, Daniela. So there are quite a few impediments. So I will just mention a few of them. And I'll particularly talk from a digital technologies point of view. That's my area of interest currently. One is that there has been a boom in digital agriculture solutions, agri-tech companies with variety of solutions, many of them involving mobile apps, for example. Like that's in the developing countries, that's like the gateway to using digital technologies in agriculture. However, the adoption of these solutions remains quite low. And so one of the points I would like to make is the challenges as we see is a lot of these solutions are not user-centric. Users face a variety of barriers in accessing these. Now, these can range from lack of digital literacy or lack of access to a mobile phone, which as I mentioned, is a gateway to making use of these digital innovations. And particularly women face many more barriers compared to men. So there is a need to really design solutions with the users rather than for them. And maybe I can explain this by giving an example from our work. So from the UNDP Global Center in Singapore, we have an innovation challenge called Cultivate, wherein we are supporting a number of startups and R&D teams, really innovative solutions. We are helping them pilot their solutions in collaboration with some of our country offices. And also helping these teams form local partnerships, whether it's with the relevant government agencies or civil society organizations, as well as other UN agencies on the ground. So one of the solutions we supported, it's a precision livestock solution, and we were testing it out in Uzbekistan. So the proposal, the solution the team had proposed was essentially an app, a mobile app to guide farmers into the right, the suitable areas where they can guide their herds for grazing. And the key challenge we were tackling is the increasing degradation of pasture land in Uzbekistan as well as in other Central Asian countries. And so we supported the team in doing a 5-day design sprint, as we called it, in a very short amount of time, helping them to define the challenge statement concretely with engaging with the relevant stakeholders, develop a prototype, and then test it with actual users. And as I mentioned, the initial idea was to develop a mobile app, like many of these solutions turn out to be. And we discovered that the farmers who we tested the prototype with, they were already using existing solutions like Telegram, and they really were comfortable with them and trusted it. They were used to getting a lot of COVID-related advisory from the governments through Telegram. And so that led to a revelation that we should perhaps work with existing solutions the users are more comfortable with, and then it pivoted into a Telegram chatbot-based solution. So that's the point I would like to make. The real need to work with your users, understand their needs, and make use of existing technologies and platforms. I mean, when we talk about mobile phones, the farmers, I mean, they're already using it for a variety of purposes, for communication through WhatsApp, Facebook. They're watching videos on YouTube. So we can really make use of these existing tools. The second impediment is sometimes the cost, and particularly when we're talking about farmers in low and middle income countries, many times the farmers simply cannot afford these solutions. So we solution designers can pivot to various suitable business models. There is a real need to come up with them. Many times farmers don't see the added value of using these technologies because they have their own tried and tested techniques. Things have traditionally worked for them. So they are really averse to trying new technologies. And so there is a real need to demonstrate actual value of these digital solutions. However, agriculture it's a slow game, and then it could take time. So you really need patience with that if you really need to scale up the adoption. And the final point I would like to make is on interoperability of different systems. So it's an emerging space. It's quite fragmented. There are a lot of proprietary systems and tools, devices, hardware and software. I mean, but they don't necessarily work with each other, which really prevents us from scaling them. So we direly need common technical standards in the whole digital agriculture space. And at UNDP, we are big proponents of open source, open data, and open standards. And with an open approach, a problem only needs to be solved once. And a great example of that is our digital public goods. And we saw the utility of digital public goods during COVID when countries were able to deploy existing tried and tested solutions that were developed in other countries. And they were able to deploy them quite fast. And these range from COVID-19 vaccination related logistical challenges to teleeducation to providing livelihood assistance. So working with existing modules through the digital public goods approach it can really help scale up the adoption. And yeah, I mean, these can range from open data sets to AI models to blockchain platforms where people can just join in various stakeholders. There are many possibilities. And there are other challenges, of course, but these are the three I would really like to highlight.
Well, thank you so much, Gundar. It reminds me what you said, piggybacking on existing technologies. It's something that Aisha actually mentioned earlier, these partner-centric approaches. And so, Aisha, I would actually like to turn to you and ask you the same question, which is, what have we learned from our past mistakes, and what are the impediments right now to adopting these new technologies in agriculture?
So, MCC is a lessons learning organization. So we were extremely excited about the possibility of this question. And frankly, we are very public about the lessons that we've learned from each project. We report on it. We have very vigorous or rigorous monitoring and evaluation that's done. And frankly, I will say very quickly, the four things are, or that I will talk about quickly, are country ownership, private sector investment, making and taking risk acceptable, because we all know how risky agriculture can be. And then finally, policy transformation. So specifically on community buy-in and country ownership, I would say that, we acknowledge and have published data around investing in, for example, irrigation and water pumps. And we have seen, after time, the pumps maybe not fully maintained. And that's on the part, from our perspective, of what we might do better and lessons learned we've integrated into future programming with regard to, working with water authorities and helping them to build out maintenance plans, and also making sure that we're just being very intentional around building the capacity within the actual government to help with management of some of those infrastructure projects. On the country ownership and community buy-in front, I'd also say that, we have reported on how users, to Gandar's point, they haven't paid for some of the resources that come out of having, water infrastructure built out. But we take that on as a learning moment for how we need to do a better job with directly communicating with consumers on what the benefit is to having these resources, and make a fuller, discussion or story around how and why you can rely on these resources, as well as appreciate what your fees are paying for if you're going to be paying for water fees, etc. So first lesson on the community buy-in and country ownership, that's one I would offer. A second one on the private sector investment, again, we know agriculture is risky. So what we've learned and what we're doing is, MCC is testing different models to leverage how our grant funding can mitigate risk to the private sector. We have several different new programs to do innovative finance. And for those who are coming in from the private sector, we are happy to, look at how our grant funding can be patient capital or mitigate the risk of you all, building certain technologies and bringing it to countries that have, maybe not used that technology previously. So that would be what I would say about the private sector investment and what we've learned. The last two, with regard to embracing risk for greater development impact, we ourselves, MCC, are looking at how we're doing our economic modeling and figuring out how we can push the envelope to look more broadly around the economic return rate and the development impact of agriculture and WASH programs, which is frankly, it's difficult when you look within and say, oh, we can internal policy wise do more and be more risky. And so we've been taking steps to go in that route because we realize the great need to do more in this agriculture space. And then last but not least, we have to talk about policy transformation. I mean, one of the biggest lessons learned that I think we've all seen and felt firsthand is, being strategic about talking with our partner countries who maybe subsidize fertilizer or have restrictive seed laws. They may discourage certain innovations, and that discouragement really, it turns away the private sector. And for our purposes, the need to be able to say how sustainable something will be when we leave. And so MCC is working along, in partnership with our investment, we also work towards pushing for policy transformation alongside it, so that we know and we can say to the private sector, our partner countries, and frankly, the communities within them, that as a result of really hard but needed policy shifts on seed laws, on public sector control of input distribution, et cetera, when you make these shifts, it will allow for your investment to grow. And so those would be my 4 immediate things I would offer. I know that we could, again, spend a lot more time on them, but we know that policy transformation, frankly, is the kind of the cornerstone of a lot of these other things being successful.
Well, I have to say, you guys at MCC do a lot right, and you certainly have learned a lot of lessons along the way. And one of the things I love that you do is focusing on an entire country in a very holistic manner. You mentioned that the issue of risk, and of course, risk in the public sector is very different than risk in the private sector. We'll get to that in a second. I realize we're coming up in the hour. I'm gonna quickly change a little bit of the order here. I'm going to turn to Aparna, and then I would like to turn to Alexei and then to Jack. So Aparna, I know that you're gonna have to depart shortly.
Thank you. Yeah, and this is, it's an important question, I think, really to think about the impediments to addressing and doing what we've been talking about on this call. And this might sound common sense to be coming from somebody from the DFC, but I think one of the biggest ones is actually access to financing, right? And actually, whether it's on adaptation and resilience more broadly, we know that the financing gaps for deploying these types of technologies is really quite key, and that's really kind of at a higher level in terms of broader financial flows to this sector more broadly, but then also kind of at a micro level, right? For smallholder farmers that might not be able to have access to financing themselves to be able to then access these technologies, whether it's kind of drought resistant crops and whatnot. So I think that would be kind of the key piece that I would mention. And I think one of the lessons we've learned and that we're trying to do more of is really then on the side of technical assistance, and really kind of one of the pieces that we've launched last year is what we've called a climate action facility, which is a commitment of spending at least $50 million over the next 5 years, specifically on technical assistance to help build up a pipeline of climate resilient and climate projects more broadly, which of course, as we know, ag and food security is a big part. So I think really kind of helping de-risk some of these investments and providing the technical assistance to get them bankable is a priority.
Aparna, thank you so much. And your comment about financing is spot on. One of the reasons that we were so eager to have you on this program and DFC. So thank you very, very much. We appreciate your participation. Alexei, I want to turn to you because when I mentioned risk, and it looks very different in the public sector versus private sector, and impediments take on a new meaning. I would love your take on what lessons you've learned and John Deere has learned from past mistakes. Not that you make a lot of them, but we all make mistakes. And what are the biggest impediments in your mind to employing new technologies in agriculture?
And I would even expand that to sustainability more broadly. I think the biggest thing that we forget about or oversee at times as an industry, as policymakers, as others in the value chain, is really understanding where the producer is coming from and making assumptions about what makes sense for them and how easy, I think, we make assumptions around how easy it is to do some of these things. Just an anecdote, I would say, from our recent history on technology adoption is we launched AutoTrack years ago, and that's a technology that helps a piece of equipment navigate within an inch. And really, basically, we talk about self-driving cars. Tractors have been doing that for years in the field. And initially we touted all of these great benefits where you can be more efficient, you're not overlapping on the same part of the field, and realized really, a couple of years after launch is the biggest impact and positive feedback we heard from producers was actually, hey, I get to spend less time in the field and more time with my family. I'm not spending 20 hours in the cab. I'm spending 17 hours in the cab. So the motivation was very different, and I think for us that was really a watershed moment. But when we think about understanding needs and giving producers the tools, I think risk is a very important element to it. If we look at the way we've really built up our entire food system as an industry, as consumers, as policymakers, the way we're doing things has really been ingrained for decades and generations. I mean, John Deere came out with the plow, and now we're realizing that, tillage is actually increasing the release of CO2 into the atmosphere. So we can't expect the growers and producers to bear the burden really of society of saying, well, great, like, hey, completely change everything you've been doing for decades and do it this way now. And that would happen at the snap of your fingers. So I think one of those key pieces and pillars that we need to address is how do we help growers manage the transition risk if we're asking them to do something different, if we're asking them to modify their production practices, even if they're better in the long term, which a lot of these the scientific evidence has shown is beneficial in the long term. There is an adjustment period, and during that adjustment period, you need to learn a new way of doing things, and it can be risky because if you don't do it correctly, you could have those yield losses potentially. So we need to make sure we have these incentive programs. We talked about access to financing, and we really need to make sure that both the policy systems and the industry systems are helping producers adjust to these risks and help them manage that. And all of this really has to, I think, really be a collective effort. I mean, we're doing our piece of it. We're launching new technologies. We're launching more efficient ways of applying fertilizer and chemicals. We're working with our downstream partners in the value chain, grain marketers, CPG companies, and consumers are also a part of the mix. So all of this, I would say, as an industry, as governments, we really need to make sure we put in the mechanisms to help producers manage those, economic and production risks.
And for those of you online, it's the private sector that's driving this innovation. So thank you for that. And you mentioned something important. The key to adoption is market positioning, right? Any business person will tell you that. And I'm so glad that you highlighted that. We're coming up on the end of the hour. I want to go to Jack. Jack, from the government perspective, what are the impediments and what have we learned from our past mistakes? And I think we have about 1 minute.
Okay. Quickly then. You mentioned consumer acceptance of new technologies, right? So that's clearly continues to be a challenge for biotech crops. For breeding, our challenge has been to ensure that no crop is left behind in this breeding revolution. So to help address that, particularly for specialty crops and smaller breeding programs like animal systems, we launched a new flagship breeding platform called Breeding Insight, and Breeding Insight is a new platform that we've partnered with Cornell University, and the goal is to provide these tools and technologies. We mentioned bioinformatics, also associated data management and sharing of data and interoperable systems. For breeders across the USDA ARS. So this was launched in 2018. We're in our second phase now, and the plan is ultimately to support breeding for at least 40 and hopefully up to 60 breeding programs across the USDA agricultural research service so that we all have the benefits. Another challenge, and I probably have 10 seconds left, is to speed up breeding. And so coming back to the issue of vertical farming, one of the things that we needed to do for perennial tree fruit crops, as an example, whether it's citrus or peaches or pears or plums or so on, is to get them to be flowering continuously so that breeders and geneticists can do their crosses and experiments more frequently rather than once a year, maybe several times a year, and then move those plants back out into the field under normal production situations to see how they perform. Anyway, we've developed the technology which we've introduced into a number of crops. It's called Fast Track, and the thing is in the greenhouse or in the fields, these trees will continuously produce flowers and fruits. Well, okay, vertical agriculture said, wait a minute, that could be useful for us. So knowledge like how to accelerate flowering and fruit production, and the fruits are all normal, by the way. Manipulating architecture, I would point you to work done on tomato by Zach Lippman, who's at Cold Spring Harbor Laboratories, who's done a fantastic job of demonstrating how a few sets of genes can be used to modify and enhance the architecture of the tomato plant for controlled environment agriculture. Industry is very excited about this. And we have folks who are working on things like photosynthetic efficiency. So if you go into vertical agriculture, controlled environment agriculture, energy costs were mentioned, lighting is critical, and so increasing photosynthetic efficiency is really key. And I have lots of stories I could tell, but I realize we're short on time, Daniela, so I'm going to turn it back to you.
Well,
turn to David here.
All right, Daniela, I think we are now at the top of the hour, so I want to thank all our panelists. I want to thank the Atlantic Council for hosting us. Thank you, Kim, for your opening remarks. Thank you, Gandhar. Thank you, Alexi. Thank you, Aisha. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Aparnar, for your wonderful insights as panelists. This has been a great conversation about how we need to move forward, both from a private sector, public sector, and mostly community-centric approach. And again, thank you all. We could easily continue these conversations probably for at least another day or more. Again, thank you for exciting insights. And as we like to say, please be bold, please be brave, and most importantly, please be benevolent for the future ahead. We'll see you next time.
Thank you, everyone.